Hey everyone, hope you're doing all right. I'm recording this on Friday after work. I'm knackered, but I thought, you know what, sod it, I still want to jump on here. Well, originally I wanted to hop on here to talk about House of the Dragon because it has just been a bit of a whirlwind time, and originally I had this whole idea of like, oh, it would be fun to talk about the state of prequels at the moment, because of course House of the Dragon is kind of killing it right now, and that is coming off the heels of Better Call Saul, which just really, I think, blew everyone's expectations out of the water, especially in terms of how that show ended. So that was what I wanted to talk about, but that's not what I'm going to talk about, as you've probably no doubt guessed from the title of this video. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to save that for next week, especially if episode 9 of House of the Dragon ends up being a winner, as most episode 9s of Game of Thrones tends to be. But yeah, we'll see how that goes next week, and who knows, maybe something else will pop in that tries to steal the spot again. But She-Hulk, have you seen the ending? If you have, great. If you haven't, I don't recommend watching this video. I think, well, we're just gonna dive right into spoilers and everything that happens. So if you don't want to know anything about it, and really this is one of those Marvel things where it's way more fun if you go into it without any of it being spoiled. Really, the whole thing is almost like a massive spoiler. As soon as you hear one aspect of it, the joke and the premise is kind of revealed at that point, so it's best to go in blind and just enjoy it. But I want to talk about it because it's just such a bonkers ending. Did anyone else agree? Really, I did not expect it to end like this in anyway. So let's just talk about the obvious thing, and to be honest, I'm going to put this down in the column of things that I liked. The massive fourth wall break that takes up a big chunk of this episode, which sees She-Hulk somehow end up on the Disney Plus menu, and through that she gets to, I guess, California and, well, real world California and the Marvel Studios. It's truly bonkers, and it genuinely reminded me of that episode of The Simpsons where Homer sort of bends reality and he's in that 3D realm and he ends up in our world right at the end. It's just so absurd, but I was just transfixed on what was going to happen. I couldn't take my eyes off the TV. I almost still can't believe that that's the route they took, because it takes a lot of balls to do something like that, particularly in a Disney Plus show, or rather, especially in the MCU, which feels like it's so tightly wound in terms of the breadcrumbs that they make for stories that get revisited down the line. Everything has to make sense within the context of the world that it is made. So to have such a massive fourth wall break like this, where it even mentions the MCU, She-Hulk says Marvel Cinematic Universe at one point, it's just truly mind-blowing, really. And what it led to was some of the best jokes of the season. There were some really, really self-referential jokes in there about how Marvel shows tend to have really kind of big fight scene endings that a lot of times don't really make sense in the context of the content that's come before it. I feel like WandaVision is the biggest example of that. That had a really intriguing premise and it ended up culminating in a big Marvel-esque fight. So to have them reference that here and say, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to go down a different route, was just, yeah, really refreshing. And, you know, the fact that you've got Jen Walters talking about smashing Matt Murdock, I mean, what's not to love there? Probably the best bit was when she's talking to the Kevin robot. Oh yeah, Kevin Feige, he is a robot in this world. And at one point, Jen Walters says to him, when are we going to see the X-Men? I was like, yep, that. I would also like to know where the X-Men are, please. Honestly, it was just really amazing to see and really dug some of those jokes. It was just a lot of fun. With that said, it's not a perfect episode. In fact, the way the episode went highlighted a couple of flaws throughout the season as a whole. So while I enjoyed the fourth wall break in that finale, I feel like the show didn't quite earn it, in the sense that I didn't realize that fourth wall breaking was such a big part of the show. Jen Walters only does it a handful of times throughout the entire season, so I just thought it was a bit of a throwaway gag, whereas when you get to the finale, it's actually a massive point that they're trying to make, and I just don't know that they really led up to that being a thing, because with things like Deadpool, breaking the fourth wall ended up being a bit of a superpower, and it could have gone down that route here. I mean, it kind of almost did, but it just didn't let people know ahead of time that that was something that She-Hulk could do. So yeah, I felt like it just didn't quite earn everything that happened, despite how fun it was to watch anyway. And I think one of the more egregious problems of this episode is the introduction of Hulk's son, Scar. What was happening in this scene? I feel like the people at Marvel just had a timer with this episode. I don't really understand why they were pushed to make this episode 30 minutes or there and thereabouts, when really they could have just made it a little bit longer. I mean, it's Disney Plus. Who's going to complain if the episode's longer? It's not like they've got ads that they have to try and work around. It would have just made more sense to tack on a few more minutes to the end of this episode to really explain who the hell this person is that Hulk has brought back with him. He's literally on screen for, I counted, I don't think it was more than 3 or 4 seconds, and then it's just, see you later, we'll explain that in the next film. Like, what is happening? And bear in mind that this is also a scene that had Hulk meeting Daredevil for the first time. That should have been amazing. That should have been a huge event, particularly to see Daredevil finally meet one of the Avengers. That is something that people have been waiting for forever, and it happened, and it just was barely acknowledged. It was a bit of a shame, really. But you know what? Despite these issues, and I guess the pacing issues throughout She-Hulk as a whole, I still really enjoyed this finale, and overall, I actually quite enjoyed the show. I think this stands as probably the best example of how the MCU should structure a television series, in the sense that it actually felt like a TV show. Now, you can complain about the content in those episodes, but in terms of actually feeling like they were trying to do something different than just have a movie that was chopped up into little bits, it felt like they actually had more of a strategy here. Yeah, it was fun. I genuinely enjoyed it, and I'd be interested to see what happens now with Deadpool, because again, fourth wall breaking, that's Deadpool's thing. One would have assumed that they would have reserved all of that big stuff for Deadpool 3, which we now know is going to have Hugh Jackman in it, so it could have gone really in any direction, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there and whether or not it can even top what happened in She-Hulk. So I guess we're going to have to wait to find out on that one. But in the meantime, let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed the finale, if you hated it, if you're ambivalent, however you felt. Why not let your opinions be heard, really? Yeah, that's all I have to say. And hopefully see you next week for a bit of a discussion on House of the Dragon, which I'm just absolutely loving at the moment, has to be said. It's a good time for TV. And yeah, with that, I'll leave you to it, and I'll see you next week.